Hi, I'm Scott and welcome back to Home Improvement Woodworking. I'm going to show you how you can build wall shelves to improve the organization of your garage. I've got a lot of vertical space here that isn't being used. My main focus is to build a shelf that will hold 2 recycling bins and the storage tote that I use for organizing my paint supplies. For less than $20 in lumber, these shelves are strong enough to hold full recycling bins. They might even hold me. Maybe we'll test that later. You ready to get organized? The first thing I need to do is sketch out a design. Then I can build a list of materials and go buy some lumber. I'm using 2x4s to build this because I really need strength. I want these shelves to float and hang on the wall. So I've got 3 shelves that I'm building that will have lap joints in the corner, and then they'll be secured to 2x4s against the wall. Those will be secured right into the studs in the wall and give me a good strong unit. With this sketch, I've been able to work out how much material I need. When buying 2x4s, I've got some advice for you. First of all, make sure you're buying kiln-dried lumber. That's lumber that's been dried so that it doesn't warp a whole lot on you. The second thing is, make sure when you buy the lumber, you sight down the end of the board. You're looking at the flat surface and the edge. You want both of those to be straight. If you find a board that's got a curve in it, put it back in the pile and keep looking. Making sure that you've got flat lumber is really important in terms of the project I'm working on today. If you start with warped lumber, you're going to have bad results. Let's start cutting some wood. The best way to cut multiple parts all the same length is to use a stop block. Once you set that in place, you get a consistent cut every single time, so your parts are always the same. Cutting the support brackets is easy on a miter saw or a chop saw. That's what these tools are designed for. The key thing is that when you flip over the piece of wood to do your second cut, that you line up the saw perfectly with that previous cut. That way you're going to end up with brackets all exactly the same size. If you don't have a miter saw or a chop saw, you can also use a circular saw. The best way to cut the lumber with a circular saw is to use a saw guide. I've got a video on how to make one of these. When you make it, the first cut that you make across here is that cut line, and that shows you exactly where your saw cuts every single time. So all you need to do is put a tick mark for your measurement, line that up, and you get a perfect cut every time. It is a little more difficult to cut something like this, but you can make a jig for that, or you can use a speed square on an angle as well. What I want to do now is show you how the joinery is going to come together so we can start assembling this. So the pieces I'm going to work on here are these flat sections. These are the shelves. And I want those shelves to go together with a half lap joint. And what that means is I'm taking 2 short pieces and 2 long pieces and overlapping them at the corners. And here what I'm going to do is take off the bottom half of this and the top half of this, and that way when I put these together it's only going to be the thickness of one 2x4. Now if you're not up for this challenge, you could just leave it like this where you've got the short 2x4 on the bottom, and what that means is your shelf is twice as thick as the 2x4. To lay out the joint, what we need to do is measure 3.5 inches across here, which is the width of a 2x4. And then draw a square line. So this part is coming off in the bottom. On the top part, we do the same thing here. Measure over 3.5. Draw a straight line. And this part needs to come off here. Same thing on the edge. We measure in 3/4 of an inch, which is half the thickness of a 2x4. Here and here, and then connect those lines. So this part up here needs to come off. There are 3 different ways that you can cut these joints. The first one is with a handsaw. You'd end up cutting across here down to both lines, and then you have to cut across this way, making sure you've got the lines straight all the way around to get a good joint. That takes a fair bit of work. In my mind, not worth the effort. The second way you can cut a lap joint is with a circular saw. Using the saw guide, just cut against that line to make sure you've got your first clean cut exactly where you want it. Then run the saw multiple times to cut a bunch of sections and then break it out with a hammer. It does require some cleanup work with a chisel. It's not the perfect way of doing it, but it can get the job done. The third way to do this is using a table saw by raising the table saw blade as high as possible. I then put a mark on the table saw to tell me where that cut's going to be, and I'm going to do a stopped table saw cut on this lap joint. Off the saw, I've got a nice clean cut here and a nice clean cut here, but what I don't have is a cut here. So what I need to do is turn it over this way and run it through the saw again. I need to have a line here so I know where to stop. So what I do is just extend this line here across the bottom, again across here, and that tells me where I need to stop that. I just need to adjust this fence a little bit to line up that cut, and I can make my second cut. So off the saw, I've now got 3 straight lines, and what I need to do is cut across here with a handsaw and just finish off that cut in the middle. If you're new to using a handsaw, there's 3 things you really need to know. The first is you need to secure your piece. I've got something called a bench hook here. It allows me to push this way and the piece is secure. If you don't have a bench hook, you can clamp it down, but you need to make sure that piece isn't going to move on you. The second thing is how you grip the saw. Your index finger needs to point forward. The reason is it gives you control that the saw is not moving back and forth. If you're just using a fist, it can tend to move on you. The third thing is how to start the saw. Use the knuckle on the hand that's not sawing to guide the saw several times as you pull back on the saw. What you're doing is you're creating a groove for that saw to ride in. Once you've done that, you can start the back and forth motion. Follow along the line across the top, and then follow along the line vertically to make sure that you've got a nice square cut. Then I just finish off the cut inside here, going from the top down in the vise. So with the lap joint cut, you can see here how it comes together. It's the thickness of a 2x4, really strong joint. This is going to be great for a heavy duty shelf. With one lap joint cut, layout becomes much faster. All I need to do is line up this on here, and there's my waist, roll it over, and there's my stop cut line. I like using this table saw method because I can get through the work pretty quickly and I get very consistent results. With all the joinery cut, it's now time to put them together. I'm going to start by putting 2 long ones down first, and then the 2 shorter ones on top. Reason is these shorter ones are going to be on the underside, and I'm going to put screws through these, so I don't want to see the screws from the top. I'm going to put this together with glue and screws. So I've got 1 1/4 inch screws here, and I'm going to pre-drill and countersink. There is a countersink that has 1 cutter on it and another one that's got 4. These ones with 4 cutters work much better, so I prefer to use those. The first step is putting glue on the joints. So I'm just using cabinet maker's glue, and it's really important when you're using glue to spread it around. I've done a lot of furniture repairs and seen a lot of broken pieces, and lack of glue can really mess up a piece. So it's also important to get a framing square on here to make sure it's going together square. And then when you pre-drill the holes, avoid the outside corner because you've got the ends of both boards. So go in here. In here. The shelves are all now ready, so I can put the angle brackets on and put everything together. The last step here is to put in these corner blocks. These brackets are really providing the support for the shelves. Right now they move, but once I've got this corner block in here, it provides enough surface area here that doesn't allow that shelf to move. So it's going to be rock solid. To install the shelf, I need to find out where the studs are. So I use a stud finder, and this identifies where the edges of the studs are. So I'm going to aim for the middle for my screws. Then I use a level to extend a line from that center of the stud all the way down to the bottom and to the top. Now I have to drill holes to get these in the studs, and studs are on 16-inch centers, and I've got 18 inches here, so if I come in 1 inch on either side, then I'll be right in the center of each of those studs. I'm using some beefy 3.5 inch number 12 screws. They need a fair bit of clearance in them, so I need to drill holes here. I recommend putting this up with 2 people. I've done a bunch of installations, so I typically just lay a board against the wall to the mark that I need, and then lift it in place, and hold it on the mark. Pre-drill the hole. And then install the screw. And that takes enough of the weight off that I can now level it up and install the rest of the screws. To the left of the door, I wanted to put shelves up as well. I built some brackets and then used plywood to cover the shelves. This had to be notched around this pipe here, but I think they look pretty good. Lots more space. Then down here to the left of the stairs, I also had dead space. So I came up with a shelving solution here. And that gives me some storage where it would be wasted space otherwise. I'm really happy with how this wall shelf unit turned out. It's given me so much organization space. If you'd like the detailed plans for this, there's a link in the description below. I'm sure the shelf unit's going to hold recycling bins that are full of paper. And I think it might even hold me.
All right. Now that's strong.
If you enjoyed this video, I've got a request for you. Please share it with your family and friends. The more subscribers we get, the more content we're going to make for you. Until next time, enjoy your time in the workshop.